have a little secret to tell you. Our director of music ministry, Misa Iwama, I think you've met her this morning. We have an inside joke that we share with a couple of other folks. I'm going there. So several months ago, maybe a little bit longer, Reverend Emily asked for a song that was set to the words of Thich Nhat Hanh. She wanted it to be used in a worship service. Maybe some of you were even here for that service. She was talking about slowing down, and the words made perfect sense. It was an exquisite choice. Happiness is here and now. I have dropped my worries. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, no longer in a hurry. Beautiful, right? But the tune was one of those earworms that has a way of getting stuck in your head. And hilariously, Misa found herself about a week later, a few days maybe, in Penn Station on her way to Beacon, running late, rushing, trying to catch the train, and unable to escape the song. Happiness is here and now. I have dropped my worries. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, no longer in a hurry. Misa has found over the ensuing months that whenever she is most stressed and running late and things seem to be ramping up, somehow this circus-themed song comes to mock her from within. I felt a bit like this these last few days as I tried to prep a sermon on being vulnerable to beauty, while first traveling to Alabama and then on to Chicago with my 17-month-old son. There I was with a screaming toddler at 30,000 feet, a terrifying place for me personally to begin with, and I was trying to squeeze out the words about being vulnerable to beauty. I tend to write the sermon first in my head, which is usually a great strategy, except for this time. I was trying to remember every experience of beauty when suddenly my eyeball was poked out. My hair was pulled, and I came to the realization that one of us needed a diaper change. There I was in the back of the plane, with the flight attendants looking helplessly on. Happiness is here and now. I have dropped my worries. For this month, with our theme of praise, we quickly discovered that praise is a common theme in poetry. Praise song for the day, as you heard in our meditation by Elizabeth Alexander. Praise song by Barbara Crooker, nearly anything by Rumi, and all of the greatest works of poetry, among them you can find, again and again, praise. In fact, next Sunday, you will hear some poems created by our own Beacon members as part of our community group spiritual practice. Praise is one of the elemental acts of the artist. And yet I wondered this week, albeit intimately so, how does one praise when the world feels frayed at the edges? Last week we explored a love of country when tyrants rule and corruption reigns. But what of praise for the world beyond these systems, the world of rivers, birdsong, mountain peak, and oak, when so much of life, we are told, is dying and under threat? How do we sing a song of praise? How do we risk loving something we may already have lost? Just last night, as I was perusing Facebook, Another one of those articles about the climate crisis came before my screen, a beautiful picture of a monarch butterfly with the title, Insect Apocalypse.
Oh.
Try to praise the mutilated world, writes the poet. How can we praise and love and adore and cherish as yet those things we love and hold, and maybe even things we didn't know our lives depended upon, are disappearing and dying? I just heard someone recently say to me, "But I love the bees," a phrase I never imagined in my childhood, because our consciousness has been so raised about how the bees are threatened and how much of life depends upon the bees. When I was a hospital chaplain, the hardest area to work in for most of the staff and the chaplains was the neonatal unit. Chaplains rarely made it more than a year in the neonatal unit before burning out or asking to be reassigned. It had the highest rate of cycling among doctors and nurses, and also a high rate of alcohol and drug abuse by the staff who worked in those areas. You can imagine it was a high pressure, intense, trauma-inducing endeavor to spend a life's career in the neonatal unit. And I remember walking, when I first was assigned to the neonatal unit, walking the hallways and thinking that even amidst all the noise, the alarms, and the movement and the hustle of the schedules, it was impossible to silence the loud truth that children so young should not be so ill, and that certainly no child should die before their parents. But in this place, that is exactly what often happened. The work was a roller coaster. Sometimes you would see an amazing turn of events that you didn't think possible, that some would ascribe the word miracle to, and at other times you would go home at the end of your shift assured of the safety and care of a child who somehow didn't make it to the next dawn. It was one such night where it had been full and I'd been on call since 8 o'clock. Around 4 a.m., I was called into a hospital room with a request for a blessing. There had been a stillborn baby who was born far too early. The mother had been on bed rest, but she had gone into labor, and despite everyone's best efforts, the birth at just 3.5 months could not be stopped. The little baby was so small he could practically fit right in his mother's hand. I was paged to go down and do a blessing because the family was Catholic, and since the baby was born stillborn, none of the priests in the area would come in to do the blessing. They would only bless a baby if it had taken a breath. So I walked down the expansive hallways of labor and delivery, listening to the cries of new babies and the struggle of mothers and the sounds and cheers of coaches and family members as new life was entering the world left and right. Typically, when there was a stillborn baby, the family would have been moved to the maternal special care unit, but the unit was all full. And so there the family was, all the way at the end of the hallway in labor and delivery. When I opened the door, what struck me first was the soft light in the room and how quiet and still everything and everyone was. The mother was holding her son with who I presume to be the father sitting on the edge of the bed. Both were fixated on this little tiny being. I took the only holy water that was going to be available from a faucet into a bowl that I had brought. And I asked, what had they intended to name this child? They told me his name. And I began offering the words of blessing, first to his hands, and then his feet, and then his heart. Then I came to the point to bless his head, and a small knit cap had been placed on his head. There was a nurse beside me, and as I went to move the knit cap up, she said, "Don't move it. You might not want to face it." But the mother and father, they looked on with strength and with wonder, and I moved it just a bit to see the soft, tender, translucent skin beneath that cap. I blessed his head and heard his father say, "He's so beautiful." Put the water back toward the sink. And I sat with the family, offering words of prayer. And as I left, echoing those words back. He's so beautiful. Something so utterly wrong and terrible had happened. And yet there, bathed in the softest of light, was such astounding beauty. In the words of C.S. Lewis, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, your heart will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. I saw again and again in the hospital as patients took situations that seemed impossibly painful and hopeless and brought in beauty. Like the story of the two friends that I've shared with you before in the concentration camp, where one little girl discovered a raspberry and rather than eat it herself, held it all day long to present it on the platter of a leaf to her friend. This kind of beauty, the kind of beauty that one infuses, I was accustomed to seeing, albeit inspired each time. What was new for me was the experience of beauty being woven in to the sorrow and pain. Already there. Present, persistent, enduring, like Jermaine sung this morning. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. It wasn't that we did something to make that beauty present. It was merely that we opened ourselves to its possibility. Maybe you have known this kind of universalist love our spiritual ancestors taught about, a love that is our source and our common destiny. I think this is the kind of teaching we need now. The natural world is slipping through our hands at a rapid pace. There are things we can do and will do, and for many species, including perhaps our own, we will not survive. The grief of this moment for many of us, myself included, is overwhelming at times. How do we respond? Try, beloved, we are told, to praise the mutilated world. Last week I told us each that we had to throw our cap over the wall. And I think the second component to fully engaging as patriots and lovers of who this country is called to be, that second part, is to risk our hearts being broken again and again. In truth, our heart is capable of much more than we give it credit for. And in truth, our world daily deserves our praise. Last night, very late, I was on the plane again. I sat down and every single part of my body ached. My thighs had black and blue marks from the jumping of a 30-pound baby. My hair had been pulled. I think I have a bald spot in the back. I had to take my glasses off because they'd been thrown on the floor so many times that I finally gave up, and so it was a little hard to see around me. Benjamin was fighting sitting down as we were getting ready to take off. In fact, at one point he leaned over the seat in front of me and he was quiet for a minute, so I let him do it until the flight attendant came up to me and said, "Are you two related?" No. The more frustrated I got, the more upset he got. You know the experience. You've seen it, surely, if not intimately lived through it. Sitting beside me was a woman who was about in her 80s, I would guess. And after I had uttered maybe a curse word or word of blessing, it's hard to tell, she smiled at me and said, "He'll fall asleep. Just wait until they turn the lights off." And sure enough, like magic, just moments after the lights went off and the engine started for takeoff, he was out. She smiled and leaned over as his head dropped onto her arm. "You know, dear, my oldest is 65 years old." I looked down at Benjamin. And then she said, "Imagine from this 65 65 years. I, like you, didn't know whether to be comforted or afflicted. But then I started to imagine. I stared at him and imagined 65 years of life bound up in this moment in my arms. I held him with the knowledge that likely, unlike my friend to my right, I probably won't see my son at 65. Maybe even he won't be gifted those years so much between now and then. The grief and worry started to swell. And I leaned over and kissed his head. The good news, beloved, is that the future is not certain. The bad news, beloved, is that the future is not certain. I thought once more of James Baldwin's words and my time in that neonatal unit. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I thought of that nurse who told me it might not be possible to face the pain and the beauty. But what choice do we have? What choice do we have but to try and praise the mutilated world, to try and love the beauty, to open our beings to being broken open? Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced in its fullness. As Barbara Crooker teaches, indeed, praise the light of late November, the thin sunlight that goes deep in the bones. Praise the crows chattering in the oak trees. Though they are clothed in night, they do not despair. Praise what little there's left, the small boats of milkweed pods, husks, hulls, shells, the architecture of trees. Praise the meadow of dried weaves, goldenrod, chicory, the remains of summer. Praise the blue sky that hasn't cracked yet. Praise the sun slipping down behind the beech nuts. Praise the quilt of leaves that covers the grass. Scarlet oak, sweet gum, sugar maple. Though darkness gathers, praise our crazy, fallen world. It's all we have. And it's never enough. Try. Will you try with me to praise the mutilated?